So you're planning your first trip to Costa Rica. Amazing. But here's the thing. Most first-timers make the same costly mistakes. This is part 2 of our series on planning your first trip to Costa Rica. And in this video, we're gonna break down the 3 biggest things that can make or break your trip. First, where to go. Second, how to budget smart. And third, how to stay safe without totally overcomplicating it. And when we talk budgeting, I wanna share 9 really practical tips on saving money in Costa Rica that are gonna help you save hundreds of dollars on your trip. If you're new to the channel, my name is Jason, and when Claire and I took our first trip to Costa Rica, there were a lot of these things that we didn't know, and honestly, there weren't a lot of great videos on YouTube that are very helpful in thinking through how to plan a trip to Costa Rica. So when we got home from our first trip, we started to take all of the cinematic footage that we had shot on our trip and put it together to really create the videos that we wish that we would have had. So let's dive right into part 2 of planning your first trip to Costa Rica. First, let's talk about the top destinations. Now, if you already know where you're going in Costa Rica, then you can skip over this part by using the chapter breaks below and just jump straight to how to budget smart for your trip. Costa Rica is not a huge country, but there is a lot of ground to cover. You're not gonna see the whole country in one trip. And so the reality is you're gonna have to pick 1 or 2 regions of the country, 1 or 2 places that you're gonna visit, that you're gonna make the highlight of your trip. And you'll just have to say, the rest of that, we're gonna save for a future trip. In this section, obviously I can't talk through every single destination in Costa Rica, but I do wanna highlight the top 5 destinations. As you think about planning your first trip to Costa Rica, these would probably be the top 5 that most people would consider for their first trip. So let's take a look. First is Arenal and the La Fortuna area. This area is famous for Arenal volcano, towering over the landscape. It's because of the geothermal activity of this volcano that you actually have a bunch of hot springs in the area, which is one of the primary reasons that people visit this area is for the hot springs, places like Tabacon. One of the other great opportunities to take advantage of if you're in this area is gonna be the rainforest adventures. There's all sorts of things to do. We would recommend taking a look at Mystico hanging bridges. We had a phenomenal time there, and if you show up early, you can have the place to yourself. Second top destination in Costa Rica is Tamarindo, also known as Tamarindo. Tamarindo is the go-to surf town in Costa Rica, famous for its nightlife. This is the kind of place that attracts a lot of people that are gonna stay at hostels, although Tamarindo also has a number of really nice resorts like Cala Luna. Tamarindo is a great place to go if you're wanting to take surfing lessons in Costa Rica. It's great for beginners and for experienced surfers. Monteverde is 3rd on the list and is gonna be a famous spot for the cloud forest. The cloud forest in Monteverde is absolutely stunning. You have probably already seen pictures of this online. Monteverde is gonna be located a little bit more in the Central Valley, so you're gonna be away from the beach. But Monteverde is also gonna include all sorts of adventurous things you can do in addition to hikes like zip lining. Take a look at Sky Adventures is really the top tier consideration there. 4th on the list is Manuel Antonio. Manuel Antonio is probably one of the biggest tourist destinations in Costa Rica, well known for its Instagrammable whale-shaped beach. Whale-shaped beach? You know, it's got the whale's tail on the beach thing. It's a whale-shaped beach. Manuel Antonio is a national park. It's huge. It's filled with all sorts of wildlife. You're gonna get to see monkeys, sloths, you name it. The thing with Manuel Antonio is you're gonna need to expect crowds. There's gonna be a lot of people there. This is not a secluded destination in Costa Rica. It is a top tourist destination. Finally, and we've saved the best for last, in our opinion, the #1 place in Costa Rica is Playa Conchal. It is widely considered the #1 beach in the world. It is absolutely stunning. 2 high-end resorts there, the W and the Westin. The Westin is geared more towards families. It's an all-inclusive resort. The W right next door on Playa Conchal is gonna be geared more towards couples, and that is gonna be high-end luxury. If you're interested in checking out more details on the Westin or the W, we'll put a link in the description. We'll also just throw up some QR codes here on the screen. If you're watching this on your TV, give you the opportunity to jump to either one of those places. And while you're in the video description or while we're throwing up QR codes, there's also a link to download our free free Costa Rica planning guide. If you're planning your first trip, this will be a huge help to you, especially the section on thinking through the 7 regions of Costa Rica and helping you think through where you want to go in Costa Rica. These are the places that if you're considering making your first trip to Costa Rica are probably going to be high on your list. You can take a look at our videos on each one of those things to get a little bit more details. Okay, second, let's talk about how to budget for a trip to Costa Rica. And I want to think about 2 things as we think about budgeting. First, we're going to talk about how to kind of break up your budget. Like if you looked at a pie chart, what are the different categories that you're going to spend on a trip to Costa Rica and how much can you expect each one of those to be for the overall trip? And then second, I want to talk about just some pro tips on how to save money on your trip to Costa Rica. As you think about this, it's good to start with a good idea of how much you have or how much you want to spend on your trip. From there, you can start to divide up what you're going to spend in these 5 primary categories as you think about your trip: flights, accommodations, transportation, food and dining, and activities and entertainment. Budgeting in advance will probably make or break your trip, and so here's kind of how we break up those 5 categories. Flights really make up about 15%. If you book 3 to 6 months in advance, that's how you're gonna get the best price on flights. Accommodations, this for us is gonna be about 50% of the trip. Now, that's gonna be different for everybody. Recognize, you're gonna spend more on a beachfront resort or you're gonna spend less if you're staying in a hostel. How you kind of calculate that out is totally up to you based on how you wanna spend your trip. Rental car is probably gonna be about 10 to 15% of the cost of your overall trip. Make sure as you're thinking about the rental car, you watch out for the mandatory third-party liability insurance. This is something that trips up a lot of people in Costa Rica, so just make sure you've done your research in advance and you kind of know what to expect there. Food is gonna be about 15% of the cost of your trip. As you think about that, you can bring this number down pretty considerably just by not eating out for every meal, but planning in advance. You're not spending an arm and a leg at restaurants the entire time. Plan for about 10% of the cost of your trip to be activities, entertainment, things like that. As you think about that, that's kind of how we break up the overall cost of a trip to Costa Rica. Now let me just give you 10 quick fly-through practical tips on how to save money on your trip to Costa Rica. First, travel during rainy season. In episode 1 of this series on planning your first trip to Costa Rica, we talked through the different seasons in Costa Rica. And as you look at that chart and think through dry season, rainy season, recognize that hotels and flights are usually going to be less expensive during rainy season. Second, check prices flying into both airports and compare the difference. Flying into Liberia versus San Jose and the difference in cost of a rental car, you could save yourself quite a bit of money on just flying into one or the other airports. It might cost you a little bit of extra drive time, but it might be worth it to save $100 per person. Third, eat out less, shop at local markets. Fourth, plan for free activities. Fifth, just plan your trip well. You can use our Costa Rica planning guide in this process, but planning your trip well is gonna mean less surprises and it's gonna be saving money on your trip. Number 6, eat and shop at places that charge in colones, not US dollars. 7th, exchange money at your bank at home before you leave for the trip. 8, book your flights 3 to 6 months in advance of the trip. That's typically the sweet spot for lower cost of flights to Costa Rica. 10th, know how to use the back machine. The back machine is the point of sale device when you swipe your credit card when you purchase something at a store or a restaurant. We cover all of the details about that in our video, 10 ways to save money in Costa Rica. We're actually just talk more about each one of these things and how to save money on your trip, but specifically covering the back machine, we'll cover the details of that in that video and we'll keep moving on this one. I'm curious if you have tips, if you've been to Costa Rica and you have tips on how to save money on a trip to Costa Rica, drop those into the comments so that other people can see them. That's a huge help to the community as people think through how to save money on their trip. And then also check out the comments, see what people have to say about that. While you're there, give us a shout out. It's always good to hear from you guys. Third, and finally, we're gonna talk about how to stay safe in Costa Rica. When it comes to safety in Costa Rica, honestly, we have never once felt anything less than safe in Costa Rica. We've never felt like we were in any danger. We never felt like we were in a bad situation. And that seems to be a pretty common experience for tourists in Costa Rica. The reality is that Costa Rica is a relatively safe place to be. In fact, according to the Global Peace Index, Costa Rica is the 58th safest country in the world. That's actually pretty high on the list in comparison with the United States. Hey, as I'm thinking about the safety of traveling to Costa Rica, I heard that Costa Rica is 58th on the Global Peace Index. What ranking does the United States of America get?
The United States is ranked 129th on the Global Peace Index. Costa Rica's higher ranking reflects its strong commitment to peace and stability.
Is it better to be a higher number or a lower number?
A lower number is better. Countries with a lower ranking are considered more peaceful. The higher the number, the less peaceful a country is considered.
That not only makes Costa Rica the safest country in Central America, but it actually makes it safer than the United States of America. So yes, Costa Rica is a relatively safe place to travel. That doesn't mean that there aren't some things that you could do to just make sure that you're being precautious. The most common crime in Costa Rica against tourists is simple, non-violent theft. In other words, probably the greatest danger you face is that someone's gonna snatch your stuff when you're not looking. So this is where it's good just to be aware of pickpockets and things like that if you're in a city or if you're in a crowded destination. If someone's gonna snatch your bag, this happens most commonly on the beach. You put all your stuff in your bag, you leave your bag there on the beach, you go out in the water, somebody runs by and takes your stuff. So that's something to be aware of. It's good even just to cover your bag up with a towel. Just kind of pay attention, especially if you're in a downtown area like San Jose. Just being aware of your surroundings will go a long way. Most of this is common sense. Avoid walking in dark areas at night. Stay in well-lit places. One of the biggest things you can do is just avoid showing your valuables. You know, don't go flashing a big wad of colones that you exchanged at the bank and you've got the whole wad of bills in one place. So you go to pay for something and you pull out this massive chunk of cash to pull out one bill out of it. Instead, kind of break that up a little bit so you're not showing huge wads of cash. And then on top of that, just don't show your valuables. Electronics, jewelry, expensive things like that. Claire and I got silicone wedding bands for when we're traveling so that Claire isn't walking around with a huge diamond on her finger. And because frankly, I'm pretty good at losing things anyway. So all of these tips are really just precautionary. The reality is that Costa Rica is still a very safe place to travel, and you're not likely to have any problems. Honestly, most of these are just common sense things that are true anywhere. This is the second in a series of videos on planning your first trip to Costa Rica. If you found this video helpful, hit subscribe so we can stay connected and so you don't miss the next episode of Planning Your First Trip to Costa Rica. If you want to save money on your trip to Costa Rica, you can check that video out right here, is the one I referred to earlier. Have a great trip.